ช่างน่าประหลาดใจผู้ชายคนหนึ่งที่เป็นโรคข้อเข่าเสื่อมที่ต้องนั่งรถเข็นมา2 ปีสามารถปั่นจักรยานรอบหมู่บ้านได้ร่างกายยืดหยุ่นอาการปวดกระดูกสันหลังหายไปหมดแล้วแขนขาไม่ชาหรือขั้นอีกต่อไปเขาไม่ส่งเสียงกระรุ้งกริ้งแล้วข้อต่อเริ่มนุ่มและยืดหยุ่นมากขึ้นราวกับว่าเขาไม่เคยเป็นโรคกระดูกและข้อมาก่อนเขาปวดเมื่อยทั้งตัวทุกวันในหลายปีที่ผ่านมาปวดเมื่อยทั้งข้อเข่าและเท้าแขนขามีอาการชาตลอดเวลาข้อเข่าบวมต้องทานยารักษากระดูกเสื่อมหลายชนิดทำให้เขาต้องไปหาหมอที่มีชื่อเสียงทั่วประเทศไทยหลายครั้งแล้วแต่ไม่ดีขึ้นบังเอิญเขาได้เพื่อนแนะนำเม็ดฟูเขาซื้อ5 หลอดมาใช้ทันทีวันละ2 เม็ดดีมากเลยเพราะว่าภายใน7 วันเขาก็รู้สึกว่าอาการปวดเมื่อยลดลงรู้สึกสบายมากขึ้น
เราเข้าใจคุณดีนะครับว่าอาการปวดข้อเข่าเสื่อมเนี่ยมันทรมานแค่ไหนจะขยับตัวจะเดินแต่ละครั้งเนี่ยมันก็ไม่สะดวกเสียงกระดูกนี่ดังกรับปวดบั้นท้ายปวดข้อปวดเข่าคุณภาพชีวิตก็แย่ลงครับผมกล้าท้าให้คุณเอาไปลองได้เลยแค่7 วันก็กลับมาเดินได้ถ้าคุณอยากหายผมจะมาบอกว่าต้องทำอย่างไรสามารถมั่นใจได้เลยนะครับว่าผลิตภัณฑ์นี้ดีจริงๆเพราะว่าลูกค้าหมื่นรายเนี่ยกลับมาซื้อซ้ำการที่ทานเป็นประจำทุกวันเนี่ยทำให้ชีวิตของเขาดีขึ้นจริงๆเขาอยากจะไปไหนเขาก็ได้ไปเขาอยากจะทำกิจกรรมอะไรเขาก็ได้ทำไม่กลับมาเป็นภาระของลูกหลานต่อ
โรคข้ออักเสบโรคข้อเข่าเสื่อมทำให้เกิดอาการตรึงและปวดในหัวเข่าไหล่หลังกระดูกสันหลังแขนขาหากไม่รักษาโรคก็ค่อยๆแย่ลงทำให้เป็นอัมพาตและพิการเม็ดฟูโบคาใหม่จากสหพันธ์สาธารณรัฐเยอรมนีพร้อมสารออกฤทธิ์แฮปโปไซส์เพื่อช่วยบรรเทาอาการปวดสร้างใหม่และบำรุงกระดูกอ่อนข้อโดยปกป้องเยื่อหุ้มไขข้อเพิ่มความแข็งแรงและความยืดหยุ่นของข้อต่อชะลอความเสื่อมและปกป้องข้อต่อช่วยให้คุณเคลื่อนไหวได้อย่างคล่องตัวและควบคุมชีวิตของคุณเม็ดฟูโบก็ช่วยบรรเทาอาการปวดสร้างกระดูกอ่อนข้อปกป้องกระดูกและข้อ
เนื่องจากผมใช้ผลิตภัณฑ์เม็ดฟูข้อเข่าเสื่อมโบคากระดูกและข้อของผมเนี่ยกลับมาดีขึ้นเลยครับผมชีวิตก็กลับมาดีขึ้นเช่นกันรู้สึกสดชื่นสุขภาพแข็งแรงกินได้นอนหลับครับโบคาเนี่ยสุดยอดจริงๆครับผมต้องขอบคุณโบคาครับที่ทำให้ผมเนี่ยกลับมาใช้ชีวิตได้ตามปกติอีกครั้งครับมีสินค้าดีๆแบบนี้ผมก็อยากจะแนะนำให้กับคนที่มีอาการแบบเดียวกับผมนะครับได้รู้จักกันมากๆครับผมเพราะว่าการเจ็บปวดจากโรคอาการแบบนี้เป็นระยะเวลานานๆเนี่ยมันจะส่งผลกระทบต่อชีวิตและจิตใจอย่างมากเลยครับหวังว่าเม็ดฟูข้อเข่าเสื่อมโบคาจะนำผลดีมาสู่คนที่มีอาการข้อเข่าเสื่อมเช่นผมนะครับเม็ดฟูข้อเข่าเสื่อมโบคาคือที่1
ถึง 3 เดือนแรกมันก็ค่อยๆดีขึ้นนะคะอาการปวดมันก็น้อยลงเข่ามันก็ไม่ดังก๊อบแก๊บก็เริ่มเดินดีขึ้นแม่เดินไม่โยกไม่เยกพอทานมาเรื่อยๆประมาณ 6-7 เดือนเนี่ยค่ะมันก็ค่อยๆหายไปความตึงก็ไม่มีค่ะก็เดินดีขึ้นแม่ขายของได้ทุกวันยืนตั้งแต่เช้าจนเย็นแม่ก็ยืนได้ไม่ปวดเข่าเลยค่ะ
เหมือนปาฏิหาริย์จริงๆเรื่องจริงเลยอันนี้ไม่ได้โกหกไม่ได้อะไรมาสอบถามคนแถวนี้ได้เลยนะเหมือนคนปกติอะค่ะขึ้นเขาได้ไหว้พระได้ขึ้นเขาผาซ่อนแก้ววัดพระธาตุผาซ่อนแก้วลูกตกใจขึ้นถึงสุดเลยขึ้นไปข้างบนสุดเลยไปถ่ายรูปไปอะไรต่ออะไรลูกยังบอกไม่น่าเชื่อเลยนะแม่ไม่น่าเชื่อว่าแม่จะดีขึ้นขนาดนี้ใครที่เป็นข้อเข่าเสื่อมนะคะทานเลยนะคะเพราะว่าขนาดดิฉันนะคะเป็นทั้งข้อเข่าเสื่อมแล้วก็รุมาตอยด์นะคะลองเลยค่ะไม่ต้องเสียดายตังค์นะคะคุ้มค่าที่สุดเลยค่ะสุขภาพเราดีที่สุดแล้วทานแล้วสุขภาพเราดีเนี่ยโอเค
เหลือเพียง50 ชุดเท่านั้นค่ะกับส่วนลด 50% สำหรับเม็ดฟูโบเคอร์รีบโทรมาที่หมายเลขโทรศัพท์ที่อยู่บนหน้าจอเลยค่ะเพื่อรับข้อเสนอซื้อ3แถม1ซื้อ4แถม2ซื้อ6แถม3
ตอนนี้มีเม็ดฟูโบคาผลิตภัณฑ์พิเศษที่ช่วยให้ผู้ป่วยหายปวดได้เร็วไม่กลับมาเป็นซ้ำและไม่ต้องผ่าตัดอีกด้วยสินค้าได้รับความไว้วางใจจากคนไทยหลายพันคน
เม็ดฟูโบก็เป็นส่วนผสมของสารออกฤทธิ์แฮปโปไซส์และเทคโนโลยีเอนไซม์ค้นคิดโดยนักวิทยาศาสตร์ซึ่งเป็นความหวังอันยิ่งใหญ่ของผู้ที่เป็นโรคข้อกระดูกเสื่อมการวิจัยที่ก้าวล้ำนี้ไม่เพียงแต่มีประสิทธิภาพสูงในการลดอาการปวดลดการอักเสบส่งเสริมการสร้างกระดูกและฟื้นฟูกระดูกอ่อนข้อเท่านั้นแต่ยังช่วยให้ผู้ป่วยคล่องแคล่วเคลื่อนอย่างรวดเร็วเมื่อเคลื่อนไหวและป้องกันการแข็งตัวได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพ
คู่นะครับเป็นเวลา1 สัปดาห์ผมรู้สึกว่า อาการมันดีขึ้นนะครับ รู้สึกตรงที่เจ็บมันเบาลงมาก ตอนนี้ข้อต่อของแขน ขาเคลื่อนไหวได้ตามปกติดีขึ้นกว่าเดิม กระดูกสันหลังก็เจ็บปวดน้อยลง เคลื่อนไหวดีไม่เหมือนเมื่อก่อนเลยครับ
ไปได้ 10-12 วันอาการปวดเนี่ยมันก็เริ่มหายเดินทางง่ายขึ้นที่สำคัญเราเนี่ยทำงานง่ายขึ้นแล้วก็เร็วขึ้น แล้วก็ไม่ต้องทนทรมาน
หลังจากที่ผมได้ลองใช้เม็ดฟูโบกาแค่5 วันเนี่ยอาการปวดหลังเนี่ยมันลดลงจริงๆครับกลางคืนเนี่ยนอนหลับสบายมากขึ้นไม่ต้องตื่นกลางดึกเหมือนแต่ก่อนแถมยังไม่มีอาการปวดหลังเลยทั้งนี้
ข่าวดีสำหรับผู้ป่วยเป็นโรคข้อเข่าเสื่อมเป็นครั้งแรกที่นักวิทยาศาสตร์เยอรมนีประสบความสำเร็จในการใช้ฮาปาโกไซด์สารออกฤทธิ์ที่พบในต้นโครงเล็บปีศาจเพื่อบรรเทาอาการปวดได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพหลังใช้เพียง 5-7 วันป้องกันการเสื่อมสภาพและช่วยให้กระดูกแข็งแรงประสิทธิภาพที่ได้รับการพิสูจน์จากทางสถาบัน RKI ประเทศเยอรมนีช่วยให้ผู้ป่วยลดอาการปวดเคลื่อนไหวได้ง่ายขึ้นและที่สำคัญไม่ต้องผ่าตัดค่ะ
เวลาไปไหนมาไหนเนี่ยจะรู้สึกว่าเราก้าวขาได้ไม่ค่อยดีนะคะไปพบคุณหมอค่ะคุณหมอก็ให้ยามารับประทานนะคะแต่ว่าไม่ดีขึ้นนะคะจนกระทั่งดิฉันได้มาพบดร.เดชานะคะดร.เดชาเนี่ยเป็นผู้ชำนาญเกี่ยวกับการรักษาข้อเข่านะคะแนะนำให้ดิฉันรู้จักโบคาค่ะเป็นเม็ดฟูที่ช่วยรักษาเกี่ยวกับอาการปวดข้อเข่าโดยเฉพาะค่ะดิฉันรับประทานมาแล้ว3 หลอดนะคะบอกได้เลยว่าดีมากค่ะอาการปวดข้อเข่าต่างๆเนี่ยหายไปนะคะเรียกว่าใช้ชีวิตประจำวันได้กลับมาเหมือนปกติเลยเวลาขึ้นลงบันไดเนี่ยสบายมากนะคะเวลาก้มเวลาเงยหรือว่ายืดตัวย่อตัวพวกนี้สบายมากเหมือนสมัยสาวๆเลยค่ะใช้แล้วเนี่ยดีมากเลยรู้สึกว่าอยากจะบอกต่อนะคะโบคานะคะเป็นเม็ดฟูที่ช่วยเสริมสร้างเนื้อเยื่อกระดูกอ่อนแล้วก็ฟื้นฟูเนื้อเยื่อข้อเข่านะคะใช้แล้วเนี่ยจะรู้ว่าเห็นผลค่ะเพราะว่าอาการปวดแป๊บเจ็บแป๊บเวลายืดเวลาเหยียดเวลาก้าวขึ้นลงบันไดพวกนี้ดีขึ้นมากเลยค่ะสำหรับคนที่มีปัญหานะคะอย่าเก็บไว้ค่ะอย่าทนทรมานนะคะแนะนำโบคาเลยค่ะเพราะว่าใช้แล้วดีจริงๆนะคะใช้แล้วเห็นผลค่ะขอบคุณมากค่ะ
ผู้ชมทุกคนคะในการสั่งซื้อเม็ดฟูโบกาของแท้โปรดติดต่อหมายเลขสายด่วนด้านบนหน้าจอเราพร้อมเสมอที่จะช่วยและซัพพอร์ตทุกคนนะคะ
หลังจากที่ทานเม็ดฟูได้10 กว่าวันนะคะตอนนี้ก็ไม่มีอาการปวดแล้วนะคะเข่าทั้ง2 ข้างอันนี้ก็แบบยืดได้สบายๆไม่มีรอยแดงบวมเลยนะคะได้รู้จักตัวเม็ดโบกาเร็วกว่านี้นะคะอาการก็คงจะไม่แย่ขนาดนี้นะคะแต่ว่าตอนนี้รู้จักแล้วก็รู้สึกดีๆรู้สึกดีมากเลยค่ะ
เมื่อก่อนผมรู้สึกผมชอบมันมากผมก็เลยซื้อมาตอนแรก3 หลอดเป็นเม็ดฟูละลายน้ำทานผมไม่คิดเลยว่าผลิตภัณฑ์โบกาธรรมดาขวดนี้จะออกฤทธิ์และให้ผลที่รวดเร็วมากผมทำไปประมาณ3 สัปดาห์ผมรู้สึกว่าอาการปวดเข่าปวดข้อเนี่ยมันค่อยๆหายไปต้องขอบคุณโบกามากครับที่ทำให้ผมและครอบครัวได้กลับมามีความสุข
โบคานี่ดีจริงๆเลยค่ะถูกใจมากๆเลยไปลองกันนะคะทุกคน
ดิฉันได้ทำตามคำแนะนำของคุณหมอดื่มวันละ2 เม็ดเช้าเย็นหลังอาหารนะคะไม่น่าเชื่อเลยนะคะผ่านไป3 เดือนแล้วเนี่ยอาการต่างๆนะคะที่เคยปวดข้อปวดเข่าอะไรต่างๆดีขึ้นมากเลยค่ะหายไปเลยไม่รู้สึกปวดเลยเดี๋ยวนี้เดินไปตลาดไปซื้อของเพื่อเอามาทำอาหารที่บ้านเองหรือเดินไปปากซอยสบายมากเลยค่ะไม่รู้สึกอาการปวดอะไรเลยเดินไกลๆได้ดีเลยเพราะว่าโบกาเม็ดฟูนี่เองค่ะ
เพียงแค่1 เม็ดใส่แก้วละลายน้ำและดื่มหลังอาหาร20 นาทีวันละ2 เม็ดจะช่วยขจัดอาการต่างๆเช่นปวดเข่าปวดหลังปวดกระดูกสันหลังชาที่แขนขาผู้ป่วยหลังจากใช้โบคาทุกคนพึงพอใจมากสามารถเดินขึ้นลงบันไดเดินไปตลาดหรือทำงานบ้านได้ตอนนี้ชีวิตของพวกเขาเปลี่ยนไปอย่างสิ้นเชิงหลังจากใช้ผลิตภัณฑ์เพียง 2-3 เดือนมีลูกค้ามากกว่า 500,000 คน เคยใช้และพึงพอใจมากกับเม็ดฟูโบคาคุณสามารถโทรติดต่อสายด่วนเพื่อทราบข้อมูลเพิ่มเติมเกี่ยวกับโปรโมชั่นเพื่อรับคำปรึกษาฟรีจากผู้เชี่ยวชาญ
กระดูกและข้อของเราก็เหมือนมอเตอร์ไซค์และรถยนต์นะคะ หากเราใช้ไป 10 ถึง 15 ปีโดยไม่รับการดูแลเอาใจใส่ มันก็จะพังและต้องทิ้งไปค่ะ แต่ถ้าเรามีวินัยต้องดูแลหลังจากใช้งานแต่ละครั้ง พวกเขาจะได้ทำความสะอาดบำรุงรักษาทาน้ำมันและจาระบีอย่างสม่ำเสมอมันจะอยู่กับเราได้หลายปีนะคะร่างกายของเราก็เหมือนรถยนต์คันนั้นวัยชราก็จะแก่เฒ่าและสึกหรอไปเองนะคะแต่ถ้าเรารักษาตัวเองให้คุณค่ากับสุขภาพตัวเองเราก็ซื้อผลิตภัณฑ์อย่างโบก้ามาดื่มนะคะดูแลมันแล้วมันก็จะเจ็บปวดน้อยลงค่ะมีชีวิตที่มีสุขภาพดีขึ้นเราก็จะรักชีวิตและหงุดหงิดน้อยลงค่ะเราก็ใช้ชีวิตด้วยพลังบวกไม่เป็นภาระลูกหลานในวัยชรา
This is Mac. He specializes in cleaning the homes of people with hoarding disorder and is used to wading through heaping piles of clutter. But this job presents an unusually large challenge. Mac will be cleaning a 6-bedroom home in Illinois, and it's the biggest he's ever tackled.
This is just a nightmare. We're finding food from 2013. We've got paint cans that I no longer have the strength to carry.
Mac often cleans solo and does much of this work free of charge, but this job is so daunting that he's invited 2 other cleaners to join him. Over the next 3 days, they'll work together to declutter and clean as many rooms as possible.
Normally, I'm dealing with a totally different type of cleaning. In other hoarder houses, I'm dealing with a lot of insects and mouse droppings and pet urine and just a lot of stuff that you definitely want to have PPE on in order to even enter the house. This one was just piles upon piles of stuff. It's the most stuff that I've ever taken out of a house.
This house belongs to a family of 4 who declined to appear on camera due to privacy reasons. One of the family members is believed to be living with hoarding disorder, although he's awaiting an official diagnosis. But even with treatment, experts say relapses can occur. This is the 4th time cleaners have worked extensively to declutter this home. The last attempt was 5 years ago.
Rooms in hoarder houses, we will often find rooms that have never been entered in a decade. And one of the reasons that happens, and it's really common, is you have a room that no longer has a purpose. So in this room, it's the living room and the purpose is to watch TV and to relax. If a room loses that purpose because they start piling things up, then the purpose of the room becomes this is where we throw all of our stuff. This place is not what I'd consider a hazard or a biohazard. It's a hazard for tripping. And it's a hazard for fire because they've got an open fireplace in here and they've got so much clutter that it becomes a danger.
Hoarding is defined as persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of their actual value. It's estimated that somewhere between 2 and 4% of the worldwide population have hoarding disorder. It's only day 1 of this ambitious project, but when Mac and his team arrive at the house, they discover things already aren't going as planned.
So they have cleaned a bunch of stuff before we got here, which normally I wouldn't like.
I wanted the big mess and I wanted to be able to go through the whole house and make it pretty myself. This is, I think, a 30-yard dumpster. They filled 2 of these already over the top and we're getting ready to fill the 3rd one. If we had more time, we would probably fill 10 of these from this house. So even though I'm a little disappointed, I'm really thankful that they did have the help.
Mac and his team plan to start on what's typically the hardest room to clean, the kitchen. They'll need to pay special attention to this space to ensure it's sanitary enough for handling food. Then they'll move on to the rooms on the main level of the house and finally tackle the basement, which hasn't been entered in 3 years. The key tools Mac and his team use are an emulsifier to cut through grease, a homemade all-purpose cleaner, scouring pads, and razor blade scrapers.
So when people asking why this job takes so long, because we have to check everything, like if it's expired or not, or still good, no. Okay, nope, a big no. For the old pancakes, no. Beer, we never waste any beer, no.
Holy crap. That was a lot. Yeah, that's pushing an easy 200 pounds.
Mac says the biggest challenge of cleaning a house like this is knowing what to keep and what to throw away.
There are a lot of people who will say you're fine to throw away absolutely everything, but they don't really mean that. They mean you can throw away the junk, but you have to decipher what's junk and what's not. There's also the urge to throw away large armfuls of stuff, and most of the time there's going to be some stuff underneath it that's important.
All right, I got one counter done. I'm done. Back to the hotel.
Although cleaning the home will make it safer and more livable, it can be distressing for people with hoarding disorder to see their space transformed. People who hoard tend to have a deep connection with their objects, and removing them can create an experience of loss, which is one of the major contributors of hoarding behaviors.
He's going to come home to a very, very dramatic change, and it's going to be a shock to him. And even though most people will come home and see the change and think, oh my God, this is so great, you've cleaned my house, he's probably not going to feel that way.
As day one comes to a close, Mac and the team have finished most of the kitchen, which they will continue to clean for the next 2 days. On day 2, Barbie and Bonnie will also tackle the sunroom and living room, while Mac ventures into the basement.
I'm going to go down to that basement and do as much as I can on the basement today. That is going to completely wear me out. If I can get that out of the way today, then that means tomorrow we can do things like the dining room and get this floor done. I'm going to attempt to tackle this area, this whole area. There's this part of the basement. There is a room to my left, and there's a room over here, and they all look like what's behind me. This is going to be extremely difficult because there's a lot of things that need to be kept.
Mac discovers an abundance of stockpiled food and supplies, including countless jugs of water, jars of marinara sauce, bottles of hydrogen peroxide, and 5-gallon containers filled with something unusual.
All these 5-gallon buckets, those are all filled with food. Yeah, I thought they were paint.
What kind of
like that one says macaroni and spaghetti or something. So I'm just going to stack them all together, and they want to keep them.
But do you think it's still good?
Probably not.
People can inherit characteristics from their parents that make them more likely to develop hoarding behaviors. Grief and loss can also contribute to this. Over the years, Mac has noticed patterns in the kinds of items he finds while cleaning.
They stack up air filters and medication and antibiotics and hydrogen peroxide and alcohol, and all of them are unopened, and all of them are there just in case. And they just keep building and building.
As Mac continues sorting through jugs of water and medical supplies, he stumbles on one item in particular he's learned to never throw away.
I've thrown away shells twice, and in both occasions people were like, have you seen a big bag of shells? That was when we went to Myrtle Beach or Florida or whatever on a family trip. But they're never displayed as a collection. They're just stuffed in a bag in some random spot. But I've learned over time that shells are always a memento for somebody. Unless they got their house infested by clams, in which case they're good to go.
Much of what Mac finds in the basement needs to be lugged upstairs to the dumpsters, and so many trips up and down the stairs with heavy bags is starting to take its toll.
Right now, my neck is just throbbing, and my right arm I'm pretty sure is injured. I have to be super careful today on what I lift and how I lift it and how much I lift. It's a little scary because If I tweak my back anymore, I'm out of the picture, and I don't want that to happen.
Back upstairs, Barbie and Bonnie are finishing the kitchen and starting on the living room and the sunroom.
I wish I had time to clean all of this, but priorities.
The owner used to sit out in the sunroom every morning and to have, scrambled eggs and toast and coffee, and she likes to bead. And I like knowing those details about the owner because it lets us know where emotionally this cleanup is going to affect them in a positive way.
As the crew begins to wrap up for the day, the wife of the person suspected to be living with hoarding disorder becomes emotional at the sight of the progress they've made.
She was on the second floor of the house looking over the banister and just seeing what Barbie had accomplished, and she wasn't even fully done with the room. She broke down in tears just being able to see the floor again. So if your partner has hoarding disorder, there is a resentment and a frustration and an anger that builds up, and then finally there's a release point where everything just comes out, and that's what happened there. She's very happy to see it opened up. She's been in the house for 13 years. Today's work was way more exhausting than yesterday. It's a different type of cleaning though, because it takes less of your mind to do it, I guess. I'm not really looking at having to sanitize and to get out tiny little stains. I'm just looking to get things out of people's way. And so it takes less mental effort, but man, it takes a lot more physical effort.
It's the final day of the crew's 3-day cleanup, and this is their last chance to organize and declutter as much of the main floor as possible.
This is the day where we have to be basically on our game and moving quickly. We're wrapping up the kitchen. We have a dining room, which is just stuff that needs to be moved.
Despite the exhaustion Mac is experiencing, he returns to the basement and makes another discovery.
God, it's like old rotten garden seeds. And they're not dangerous, but they smell really bad. Garden seeds, when they go bad, smell like raw sewage. You have to breathe through your mouth when you're putting it in. Otherwise, it'll make you nauseous. You'll be able to see the story unfold as you go through layer after layer of old stuff. The deeper you go into a hoard, that's where you start finding the really rotten stuff. And so it always gets worse before it gets better.
Excessive acquisition occurs in the vast majority of cases. Oftentimes, these items are on sale and therefore are bought in large amounts.
So instead of just getting one, they see the deal and they'll get 20. But even in a big house like this, there's not room to put them all. So you've got this giant pile of shop lights, and you're probably going to find that with everything from craft supplies to just random kind of stuff. Night lights. There's an entire rack of night lights. What's really frustrating about this is there's so much stuff that's necessary and has legitimate actual use. That's actually really rare for a hoarder house.
At the end of day 3, the crew has successfully cleaned the kitchen, sunroom, living room, dining room, and basement, and they've removed enough stuff to fill 3 30-yard dumpsters to the brim.
We're almost done now. Compared to other hoarder houses, it's just me. With 3 of us working here, in order to get the entire house, every single room, top to bottom clean, we would have needed a crew of probably 10 plus people for at least 2 weeks.
After Mac and his team leave, the family will finish cleaning the remaining rooms. They'll also hire help to maintain the home.
I like seeing a house that is so covered up with stuff that whenever you get all of it put away and where it goes and you get everything cleaned up, seeing the house as it was intended to be seen is really a cool thing to me. And I think that's part of my brain that thinks of rooms like jigsaw puzzles. But what keeps me doing it, I think, is more the stress relief that you see happen on the owner of the house. You can see the stress come off of them at the very end whenever you leave. This one was just exhausting in every measure just because of the sheer amount of stuff. But it's worth it, especially whenever we get to look around the house and say, holy crap, we did that. We all did that.
Sugar makes up about 1/5 of the daily diet of an American child, and the problem starts earlier than you might think. Baby and toddler foods are getting sweeter every year, and most of it is ultra-processed, which could have long-term health impacts like heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. So what exactly is in these products, and how can parents tell if they're buying something healthy? I'm Mia DeGraaf, and I'm a health editor at Business Insider.
Thanks to more and more miracles.
Baby food emerged in the 1920s and was ultra-processed from the get-go. The first baby food is attributed to this man called Harold Clapp, who was a father in Rochester, New York. He was looking after his infant son while his wife was sick, so he fed him soups and strained peas, and he thought, how about I bottle these things up and give them to local people in my community and even local drugstores. So soon this was being sold nationwide. Parents with kids who maybe couldn't be breastfed or weren't thriving nutritionally would buy these broths and stews and strained peas, and their kids would get better. Up until the 20th century, people thought that adult food was dangerous for babies under the age of 1 or even 2 or 3. Fruits and vegetables were rarely introduced for a really long time, so their nutritional level was way lower. They really weren't getting that full plethora of protein, carbs and vitamins. But it was really Gerber who reinvented the wheel.
Tell us, please, we want to know, how'd you get that Gerber glow?
There was this father and son duo called Frank and Daniel Gerber who had a canning company in Fremont, Michigan. According to Gerber law, there's a story that Daniel's wife, Dorothy, was at home trying to strain some peas for their sick infant daughter. Daniel comes home to find Dorothy just completely exhausted, covered in mushed peas. So she asks Daniel, could he get people at his canning company to make this for her? Canned fruits and vegetables were, at the time in the 20s, really expensive and kind of inaccessible. So Gerber was seeing that if they could make these foods appropriate for babies and make them easily accessible and affordable, there was huge potential for this market. Around 1926 to 1927, Gerber started testing out some formulas of what they could make for babies.
Gerber prepares food for the most important person in the world, your baby.
They were testing these products on Daniel's own daughter, Sally, and then also on other infant kids. So by 1928, they had their first range of baby food. So that was strained peas, prunes, a beef vegetable soup, and they started rolling them out. And it was a huge hit.
To learn why 4 out of 5 pediatricians who recommend baby food recommend Gerber.
Baby food manufacturers were marketing these products as just as nutritious, if not more nutritious, than homemade food. Also that they were scientific, that they were untouched by human hands. These canned ingredients were basically pummeled with heat to sort of sterilize it and make it shelf stable. And that process basically breaks down everything inside so the solids and liquids separate. It can also impact the color, so it could get a little paler. It can also impact the flavor. So to offset that, you can add in sugars and preservatives and fats that will prevent too much destabilization of the product inside. So babies were getting these foods, but there were longer lasting effects that we didn't yet appreciate. So the global baby food market has grown significantly in the last decade, from 9.6 billion in 2010 to 17.9 billion in 2022. Experts largely agree that 70% of food for babies and toddlers in the US is ultra-processed. So I'm going to measure how much sugar is in one of these pouches. I'm picking this one. Really highlights that it's naturally flavored and that it's a yogurt pouch, but it contains 14 grams of sugar, of which 8 grams are added sugars. And babies and toddlers, according to the WHO, should not be consuming added sugar. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So that's how much added sugar is in this pouch. 3. If you look at this, that looks like a lot of sugar to me. I can't imagine just mixing that with water and just drinking that in one go, but I could imagine consuming all of this within a couple of minutes. So it just goes to show how much hidden sugar there might be or how much sugar there might be in a product that you don't really notice straight away by looking at the front of the package. This is something that's quite pervasive in all of baby and toddler food. There's a recent report published by the World Health Organization that showed that baby and toddler foods are getting sweeter every year. The amount of sugar either added to or just inherent in these products has ballooned in the last 10 years. And it's something that may not be that straightforward to notice if you're just reading the label, especially if you live in the US. In other countries, sugar that is derived from fruit, such as fruit concentrate, is categorized as free sugars. In the US, that is not always the case. So I've got a bunch of products here, and I'm going to go through them starting from about 6 months, going up in age. We'll look at the nutrition labels, at the ingredients, and identify what are the red flags and what are the green flags. And we're going to start with pouches, because that is the biggest sector in baby food and the fastest growing. This has grown about 900% since 2010. First up, we have Happy Baby, green beans, pear, and spinach. So this pouch is really presented as a dose of vegetables. Even look at the design. It's got this sort of crown of spinach up here and then a bed of green beans down here. It says full serving of veggies up here. I had kind of missed the pear, but you know, that's technically there. The first ingredient is going to be the most plentiful. So in this, it is organic green bean puree. And then the second one is organic pear puree. This is marketed as a veggie, but it's a lot of sugar for a baby to be eating in a vegetable meal. On this one, there are fewer calories per serving than a dietitian would normally look for in something for a baby or a toddler. You're looking for 60 calories per 100 grams. This is 50 calories per 113 grams. So that is a little lower. So overall, not so bad, but there are a couple of red flags, including the low calorie count per serving and the high amount of sugar from pear. In a statement to Business Insider, Happy Family, which is the parent company of Happy Baby, said that this pouch provides a full serving of organic veggies, which for kids is a quarter cup. It also said that there's no added sugar, and because babies' tastes lean to the naturally sweet, we wanted to support early veggies introduction and acceptance. Next, we are going to look at Earth's Best Organic Apple, Peach, Oatmeal, Fruit and Grain Puree. It has 60 calories per 99 gram serving, 5 milligrams of sodium, total sugars 12 grams, and that includes 2 grams of added sugar. That is a red flag immediately. The most plentiful ingredient in this pouch is organic apple puree concentrate, then water, then organic peach puree concentrate. The 2 fruits in this are concentrates. That means that the sugar from the fruit has been extracted and distilled, and it's basically acting as an added sugar. So the amount of sugar that a child is going to consume from this when they suck it up pretty quickly is not insignificant. If I look on the back of this label, it says, made with wholesome ingredients from our family of certified organic farmers. But the problem with that is that that's not actually a regulated term, so it doesn't really mean anything. And the reality is quite a bit away from the general vibe that this package creates. Unfortunately, that's what experts say is a health halo. The WHO specifically calls on companies not to list all of these positives when there are also negatives hidden in the package. In this case, there's added sugar, and the 2 fruits included in this are actually concentrates, not whole fruits. Now, I'm gonna get this apples, blueberries, and oats. This is from Happy Baby Organics. So we have 80 calories per 113 gram serving. That is good. 13 grams of sugar, which is higher than some of the other pouches that I've looked at, but this is a fruit-based sweet product. The fact that you have no added sugar here means that all of the sugar is coming naturally from the fruits. In the ingredients list, organic apple puree, organic blueberry puree, milled organic whole grain oats. If you're going to have oats in a product, you do want it to be whole grain. That means that it contains every aspect of the grain. The only ingredient you might not recognize in this ingredient list is ascorbic acid, and it's used commonly in processed food to inject a bit of vitamin C, but mainly to improve shelf stability and also to kind of fuse back together the nutritional makeup of ingredients that have been broken down in the process. Pouches are really interesting in the sector of baby food. They're really, really popular. At the same time, because these things are really mushed up and do have sugars inherently infused into them, you're consuming these sugars much faster and not necessarily burning the calories or digesting the nutrients in the same way that you would with homemade food. What you want them to be doing is seeing a green bean, seeing an apple, touching it, so that they associate whole foods positively in their brain and build that connection. And they also have that sort of sensory experience of learning how to interact with foods and feed themselves. We also have puffs. So baby puffs is a really classic snack. You can have them from about the age of 6 months old and onwards. They've got a really good level of texture. This one that we got actually pretty healthy. It contains organic peanut butter, organic whole grain yellow cornmeal, organic degermed yellow cornmeal, and sea salt. Very few ingredients, and it doesn't have added sugars, which is good. The thing that doctors usually care about with puffs is that it can be a vehicle for added sugars, and often they're made with sort of low nutrient grains like rice or wheat without the germ. So now I'm going to look at some food that's marketed to babies who are slightly older, around 8 months old or crawling. First, we have Happy Baby Organic Yogis, freeze-dried yogurt and fruit snacks. This one is mixed berry, gluten-free, and made with real yogurt. We really associate yogurt with probiotics and things that are going to nurture your gut. But crucially here, it does say in small print, does not contain live and active cultures. So that means it's not necessarily going to be a fountain of probiotics that you might get from a fresh yogurt. Some things that stand out to me. Number one, tapioca starch. It's often used in gluten-free foods, and this is listed as gluten-free, but tapioca starch is often seen as something that is a deliverer of empty calories. And while it can be healthy if you're using it to make something, it can still sort of spike your blood sugar in certain ways. Another red flag is that this product contains things listed as flavors, mixed berry flavor and strawberry flavor. That means that that is not coming from the real fruit itself. You've created that flavor based on using different kinds of chemicals and oils. It's artificially made. Whereas in other products, you might see a fruit concentrate or a puree or the fruit itself. It's really confusing because when you get this product that says mixed berry made with real yogurt, it's really kind of portraying this idea that this is real and natural. And then when you look on the back, you get to the very bottom of this long and tiny printed list of ingredients, and you see that some of these flavors aren't actually from the real fruit. These sort of dissolvable yogurt products, they're really common within the baby food sector, and it's a bit of a pet peeve for dietitians and doctors and researchers in this area, because they say that this is just a classic way of delivering unnecessary sugars and chemicals and preservatives to kids. Let's open it. So holding this, I can really feel this kind of the milk powder and dried aspect of this. They feel really sort of dry and crispy. Let's give it a taste. Wow. Yeah, not very satisfying, I will say, but I am not 8 months old, so maybe it would hit different if I was a baby. Tasting this really helps me to understand what food researchers say when they talk about multi-phase processing. When you feel it, it feels crispy. You put it in your mouth and then it dissolves and you get this kind of yogurt creaminess, and then it disappears kind of instantly. And that now is making me want to eat another one, which is kind of wild. I can see that process when my brain wants to repeat that multifaceted eating experience. And the problem long-term with that, if you're training a baby on how to perceive and interact with food based on something like this, it is a really difficult starting point because you expect that every food you eat is going to deliver these like constant shots of like dopamine release, and that everything's going to have this multi-phase, multi-textural thing. Then when you get to eating a whole food that is going to be delivering so many great nutrients, it might feel kind of like unexciting by comparison. A baby might be training themselves to expect this level of manufactured brain experience when they eat a food like this. We asked Happy Family for a comment about this snack product. They said it's made with yogurt cultures and fruit, and it's freeze-dried to melt in your mouth for a fun texture adventure. They also said the 1 gram of added sugar per serving can be balanced in the context of an overall nutritious eating plan. So now let's look at some foods for toddlers. We're going to start with animal crackers for toddlers. They are cinnamon graham flavored, and they come in these really sweet animal shapes. On the front, it says that this is delivering 10% of your daily value of iron and vitamin E per serving. Sounds nice. Baked with whole grains. Also says non-GMO ingredients. Again, here we have love to learn animal shapes. This is something that you see a lot on baby food, where it's really marketing not just a nutritional value, but also a cognitive value, that your baby might be using this food to learn and develop. It says it just contains goodness, no artificial sweeteners, flavors, or colors. Total sugars 2 grams, which includes 2 grams of added sugar. So all of the sugar in this is added, which means that it's not naturally coming from the ingredients that it's made from. It's being added in separately. So ingredients list. Some of the red flags that stand out to me: cane sugar being one of the most plentiful ingredients is not ideal. There's sunflower oil and then a ton of other chemicals which are basically used to fortify these ingredients against the process. It's just a whole mix of preservatives. That reads more like something I would see on like a store-bought packet of bread for an adult. If you Google each of these individual things, they're not necessarily bad for you in tiny amounts. But the thing about having them all together is it's an indication that this is ultra-processed. And then it's important to note that the front of this package really advertises the fact that this is high in iron and vitamin E. But when you look at the ingredients list, it shows you that those are things that have been added in as supplements. Despite having read this whole ingredient list that makes it sound awful, they do look good. I'm excited to try them. Wow. Okay, I'm smelling that sugar. It smells great. Oh, this is really sweet, actually. There's a little dog. Kind of scarily, there is another dog that doesn't have eyes. These are really cute. Let's give it a go. I really like crackers like this, even though I'm in my 30s, but this is really sweet. The reason that sugar is risky for kids, especially when they're under the age of 2, is that their whole body is developing. And recent studies have shown that kids who consume a high amount of sugar in their early years have a much higher risk in their whole lifetime of having a stroke, heart attack, developing diabetes, obesity, all these kinds of things. The WHO has explicitly called on manufacturers to stop putting added sugar in food that is marketed to kids of this age, because it can create these cascading health effects and a level of addiction. In a statement to Business Insider, Gerber said that these animal crackers are an occasional snack option when incorporated within a varied, balanced diet. So let's look at some toddler milk. Here I have Nestle Nido. This is for age 3 and up. It contains vitamin A and D, iron and zinc, immunity. There's a big badge here that says it has iron to help with brain development. Again, a classic claim made with baby food. Wow, huge ingredient list. So some things that stand out before we get to the nutritional facts is that there is so much sweetener in here, corn syrup and sugar. You also have milk fat and non-fat milk. These are things that have been processed and broken apart. And then the real giveaway for that is that you have this whole collection of other chemicals, including sodium ascorbate, ferrous sulfate, niacinamide. So this has a bunch of stuff added back in, mainly because all of that stuff was stripped out in the process. This is why doctors agree that toddler milk is kind of unnecessary, because when you get to the age of 3, you can consume milk. Like, you don't need this necessarily. It's a sector that has been created because people will buy it. We asked Nestle for a comment about Nido. They said this product helps parents to meet certain nutritional needs of young children above 1 year of age. We'll also look at pouches specifically for toddlers. So there is beech nut, iron and zinc, this smoothie made by Sprout Organics, which honestly sounds like a kind of smoothie I would want to make myself. So the distinction between these pouches and pouches you see for younger ages is that pouches for toddlers tend to have more ingredients or ingredients that would be harder for a younger baby to digest. So let's look at this one. You can already see on the front of the label that it has flaxseed, which is a really healthy kind of seed, really good for your digestion, but it's, slightly more arduous to digest. So this is something that would more be appropriate for an older child to consume. Looking at the label is really helpful actually, because here I've got a lot of natural ingredients that I recognize. Here, there are a couple that stand out that have sulfate monohydrate pyrophosphate. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's unhealthy, but it's a little red flag that there may be ultra processing at play, things stripped out or things added in. So it's something to research for yourself. Beechnut said in a statement that they believe in choosing purposeful ingredients to help introduce babies and toddlers to a wide variety of flavors and textures. So the thing with ultra-processed baby and toddler food that has like little droplets of processing and sweetener and preservatives and artificial colors, it's really introducing babies and toddlers to this kind of texture and flavor of foods, opening the door to this whole world of kid foods. Once you get over the age of 6, that's when this whole industry explodes into all these like sugars and preservatives and added colors. You see things like cereals, which look really exciting. They've got all these colors and they have the same kinds of claims like excellent source of vitamin D. But if you look at the label, this contains a whole world of things. It contains artificial colors that doctors really warn against, including red 40, which has been linked to different issues with heart. And also there is some research that links it to ADHD, yellow 6, blue 1, and other color added. There's all these kind of vague terms on this label that really don't specify what you're consuming, but the front of it really platforms that this is going to be a good source of nutrients. Ultra-processed foods are associated with short-term and long-term health impacts for everyone, and babies have their whole life ahead of them. Short-term, there might be skin issues, there might be digestive issues, but long-term, it increases your risk of things like heart disease, obesity, diabetes, chronic metabolic issues. So that's the big picture concern of babies having ultra-processed food as a high proportion of their diet. So to wrap up, if you are in the supermarket and you're between all these different labels, really focus on things that have very few ingredients, ideally 3 or less. No added sugar, no artificial sweetener, no added colorants, and natural sources of nutrients. And red flags, avoid corn syrup, any ingredients you don't recognize, preservatives, colorants. The most important thing for parents to hold on to when they're trying to navigate this incredibly complex industry is that the responsibility is not all on you, the parent, to work this out. The responsibility is really on manufacturers and regulators to make this easier for parents. In the US and around the world, parents really don't have time to be making all of the right decisions. There is so much pressure on parents. If you have to use a pouch, use a pouch. And where possible, give your child a piece of broccoli so that they get the experience of recognizing that food, playing with that food, touching that food, smelling that food. But if you're in a bind and you're picking out one of these ingredients, that's absolutely fine. The point here is doing the best that you can when you can and not holding all of the anxiety yourself. Who designs these animals? There's also a cow and a duck. These are really cute. And a bear and a cat. It takes over 40 gallons of sap to make just one jug of real maple syrup. That's why one of these bottles can cost $10. And grocery stores are flooded with imitation syrups that don't have any maple sap at all. In fact, tons of expensive foods we love eating might not be the real thing, including wasabi, vanilla, and truffle oil.
The main reason why this happens, it's all about money.
Some of this is legal, as long as products that aren't the real deal disclose it on the packaging, even if it's a bit sneaky. But often, it's illegal, with entire criminal rings behind these counterfeit foods. Globally, the fraudulent food industry could be worth $40 billion.
The sort of least end of it, you're getting ripped off. At the worst end, you're literally getting poisoned.
So how did fake food take over our grocery stores, restaurants, and kitchens? And how do counterfeiters get away with it? We travel around the world to learn how to spot the real stuff. First up, truffles. Hate to break it to you, but your $15 truffle fries don't have any truffle on them.
What is called truffle oil is entirely made in a laboratory, has nothing to do with mushrooms.
Real truffles are pricey and rare, and they need specific conditions to grow, usually in places like Italy and France, or here in the UK.
Truffles are always found with trees, and they have to be the right type of trees. Under the ground, the truffle is just the fruiting body, so an equivalent of an apple.
We used to train pigs to find the fungi, but now mostly dogs do the sniffing.
Good boy, thank you, good boy, come. So he's told us it's there, it's still in the ground, so do I want to take it out of the ground or not? It all depends on if it's ripe. If it's unripe, there's no point in having it. So the nose comes into play and we actually sniff the ground for it. Yeah, that's a nice one. Yeah, that's probably about 70, 80 grams. Once a truffle is out of the ground, the clock is ticking. It's just sort of slowly going to degrade over time.
People have learned how to farm truffles successfully. About 80% of the black truffles we consume are now cultivated, but it can still take as long as 6 years to grow them, and most attempts to farm the most expensive white truffles have failed, which is why they're so pricey and often counterfeited. Since truffles are hunted in the wild and delivered in labelless bags, it's easy for fraudsters to swap them out for cheaper ones without getting caught. But truffle oil might be the trickiest. It's usually just olive or sunflower oil with a touch of a synthetic compound derived from petroleum called 2,4-dithiapentane. It contains the same aromatic component of foot odor. That's why you get that earthy taste and can sometimes smell gas.
Anything with a truffle flavor added to it is really problematic. Truffle is not a product that lends itself to being either made in oil or steeped in oil.
You can tell it's artificial when you see words like truffle flavoring or aroma on a package. The most foolproof, though, see it shaved right in front of you.
It should look like a truffle, look like a mushroom product.
Maple syrup is another tricky case. One food fraud lawyer we spoke to estimated as much as half of what's labeled 100% maple syrup might be fake. Real maple syrup is tapped from trees. Canada produces 85% of the world's real supply. But the US set production records in 2022 thanks to brands like Sapjack out of Vermont. The company steam heats its sap. Then machines filter and bottle the syrup, usually within 6 hours. It takes about 44 gallons of sap to make just 1 gallon of real maple syrup, which is why real maple syrup can cost about 6 times more than pancake syrup. The imitation kind is often a mix of corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, caramel color, and added flavorings. This kind of syrup isn't illegal, and you can tell it's not real maple when you see words like pancake syrup or table syrup on the label, while the authentic kind will say 100% or pure, and have just maple syrup on the ingredients list.
But there's a more nefarious kind of syrup fraud. The FDA says companies have previously bottled up fake syrup, labeled it 100% real syrup, and pocketed the profits. And that's illegal. In that case, it might be best to look at the consistency. Real syrup is often thinner than fake corn-based syrups. Wasabi is probably the most widely faked food on our list. It's estimated only 1% of American wasabi and 5% of Japanese wasabi is real. Most of it is actually a mixture of horseradish, a sweetener, and a food starch.
It's just funny to me when people say, like, oh, I love wasabi, I love sushi here. And I'm thinking, like, well, you've never had good sushi and you've never had any wasabi, but, you know.
The FDA doesn't have specific guidelines for the term wasabi, so only its rules on labeling would apply. As long as the ingredients list is accurate, it's legal to label something prepared wasabi, even if it's just horseradish.
Not going to make you sick to eat it, it just doesn't taste as good.
Real wasabi is related to cheap veggies like horseradish, cabbage, or broccoli, but it can cost nearly 30 times more. For one, there's way more demand than supply. Wasabi is surprisingly rare. It's considered the hardest plant to farm commercially in the world. It grows naturally along Japanese mountain springs, where the temperatures are mild and there's enough shade and gravel soil. The Wasabi Company, based in the UK, is the first commercial grower in Europe. The company has recreated the conditions of Japan, but it still takes 18 months before the plant is ready for harvesting.
The harvesting will be done by hand, and then it's a laborious process to break it apart, the whole plant, and then clean up the rhizomes. There's no machine that's gonna help you pull this out of the ground and trim it up fit for the sushi counter. This is a stem, and we get our special grater, which has very, very fine teeth, and you can see that it doesn't have any holes on the back. We're not after really grating the wasabi, we're after pasting.
This can cost $319 per kilo.
And if you're not seeing it grated fresh in front of you, then it's very unlikely it's fresh wasabi.
So what does real wasabi look and taste like? It should be chunkier and have a gritty texture, whereas horseradish-based wasabi will be smooth. And the real stuff actually doesn't have as spicy of a kick. It's more subtle. Another victim to confusing labeling, Parmesan cheese. There are only about 300 dairies in the entire world that are certified to produce authentic Parmigiano Reggiano, and they're under strict regulations. It can only be made in one region of Italy, called Emilia-Romagna. This is the sole place in the world that has all three bacteria needed to give Parm its distinct taste. Cheese masters combine day-old skim and fresh milk. They add whey and rennet, then they split the milk into curds. The mixture cooks for 5 minutes to kill off bacteria and to settle the curds at the bottom of the vat. What's left is a massive 220-pound curd. Cheesemakers dump it into molds and add stencils to identify the cheese as authentic. The wheel heads to brining to form a rind, and then a huge aging room.
Se loro ci sono, fermentano le componenti del latte negli aromi, profumi e sapori tipici del parmigiano.
It takes at least 1 year of aging for it to develop these crunchy crystals. They're buildups of amino acids, and they hold the cheese's umami taste. But some will stay here for up to a decade. The longer they mature, the more crystals form, and the more valuable they become. One wheel can cost well over $1,000, but other countries have different laws. In the US, you can legally call something Parmesan without following the strict Italian rules for Parmigiano Reggiano. For example, American Parm can be aged for only 10 months, whereas in Italy, at least a year is required. But grated cheese is even further from the real thing. In the US, producers are allowed to mix in fillers like rice flour or cellulose, commonly obtained from wood pulp. They're used to keep the grains from sticking together. The Center for Dairy Research suggests keeping cellulose levels between 2 and 4%. But the problem is, companies aren't required to list the percentages of these fillers, and often, no one's checking. In 2016, Bloomberg reported Walmart's Great Value 100% Parmesan had 7.8% cellulose, nearly double the suggested limit. Some 50 lawsuits were filed alleging the labeling was misleading, but a judge dismissed them all. But there's a more nefarious kind of parm fraud, where criminals label counterfeit cheese as real Italian Parmigiano Reggiano. Estimates put these illegal sales at $2 billion each year. Phony cheeses are hurting the real Parmigiano industry in Italy.
They lose market share and value. Half the people in Parma's life depends upon the Parma ham or Parmesan cheese industry. And so there's a big impetus to protect that.
So while you're standing in the cheese aisle, how do you make sure you're grabbing the authentic parm? Well, first, maybe don't buy those shakers. Each chunk of the wheel will have a part of the words Parmigiano Reggiano spelled out in dots. It'll also have a protected designation of origin, or DOP label.
The real Parmesan cheese from Italy is readily available. Almost any supermarket, certainly any cheese shop. Sometimes it's cheaper than some of the fake versions.
The other tell is taste. Parmigiano Reggiano, depending on the age, will have those crystals that pack a fruity and nutty flavor. Just like Parmesan, vanilla can have some confusing labeling. It's estimated just 1% of all vanilla products in the world are real. Most of the legit stuff comes from Madagascar, where farmers pollinate orchids by hand. The beans are boiled and sun-dried at a processing facility. Workers hand massage each pod to release the chemical vanillin. The beans then soak in a mixture of alcohol and water to make the extract. The whole thing is laborious and expensive. So in the US, many brands sell imitation versions using lab-made vanillin. It's either derived from petroleum or from compounds found in clove oil, wood, and bark. And that's legal as long as artificial flavoring is listed on the package. But it could be more dangerous in other countries. In 2008 in Mexico, some products labeled as vanilla were found to be made from the beans of a tonka tree, a completely different plant. They contained a toxic substance called coumarin that's banned in the US and is dangerous for people on blood thinners. These illegal products were sold all over the Americas. So how can you tell what's real? Many vanilla products like ice cream and cookies get away with using the imitation stuff by just saying natural flavoring on the ingredients list. The real stuff will list vanilla bean extractives. Also, take a look and a whiff. In this test we did, the authentic vanilla smelled much stronger of alcohol, and it was much cloudier than the fake stuff. Caviar, the most expensive fish eggs out there, can also mean big payouts for fraudsters. In the US, federal agents have busted multiple criminal operations for fraudulent caviar. It's often counterfeited because it's so difficult to harvest. One of America's only caviar farms is raising beluga, which has some of the priciest eggs on the market. A single kilogram can sell for a whopping $24,000. Caviar is made from the roe, or the eggs, of sturgeons, which are critically endangered. It takes 10 years before a sturgeon is ready to have its roe harvested. Producers remove the egg sac from the dead fish and rub it over a metal grate. Salting the eggs is especially difficult because workers don't want to pop any of them. A 2-ounce jar goes for $175 at a shop in New York City. Those high prices tempt criminal counterfeiters, who often come from China or Vietnam. They make fake caviar from the eggs of cheaper fish. Or they'll label low-grade caviar as a fancier imported kind so they can charge more, which is hard to catch.
I certainly cannot look at a bunch of fish eggs and tell whether they're expensive fish eggs or not expensive fish eggs.
So if you're going to spend hundreds on a tiny jar, you want to make sure it's the real deal, right? Well, you can use the hot water test. Real caviar will harden in hot water as the proteins cook, but fake caviar will dissolve. Knockoff roe might look dull and take irregular shapes, while authentic caviar will be uniformly sized and have a glossy shine to it. Fake honey is even more widespread. a third of what's traded internationally is adulterated or completely fake.
I feel it's the biggest secret food fraud that has ever been perpetrated globally. I really do.
Real honey needs a perfect combination of nature and patience. Bees do most of the work. Beekeepers have to be careful not to disturb the natural process. They suit up with a face mask and full-body coverings to protect from stings. This smoker calms the bees so they can easily remove honeycomb frames. Beekeepers scrape the wax that keeps the honey in each cell. Finally, a centrifuge spins the frames, pushing the honey out of the combs. But globally, there is more honey being sold than the world's bees are capable of making. Only counterfeits containing little to no real honey can explain that difference. Dupes are made up of high fructose corn syrup and other cheap syrups like glucose, rice, cane, or beet.
You don't have to go to all the hard work of the beekeeping and all of that lengthy process. You just get maybe some honey and some other honey from somewhere else. You blend it together, you add some sugars.
Many experts say the fake honey often comes from China, the biggest honey exporter on the planet. Fraudsters in China market sugar syrups that will outsmart lab tests if added to honey, or they'll filter out all the pollen, making it impossible to trace.
This stuff that's being shipped out of China technically isn't even honey. You're looking at that honey going through so many pairs of hands. So there are many, many opportunities for it to be bulked out with cheaper sugars.
In 2013, the U.S. Justice Department busted 2 American honey importers in one of the biggest food fraud cases in U.S. history. In what's now called Honeygate, they routed sham Chinese honey laced with antibiotics through other countries to avoid import fees. Both had to pay millions in fines. But Sarah does have a few tips. First, avoid any label with the word blend.
The very act of processing honey, that damages honey irreparably. Even if they're not adding anything, they're corrupting that honey and they're making it worthless, just a worthless jar of sugars.
She says your best bet is to buy raw honey from a local producer at a nearby farmer's market and be willing to pay a little bit more.
If you're going for the cheap end of the market, you're going to get an awful lot of fraudulently produced honey.
Olive oil also tops our list of frequently faked foods. Authentic extra virgin olive oil has to be freshly squeezed from ripe olives. Most come from farms in Spain, Italy, or Greece. Like this cooperative farm in Antequera, Spain, the largest olive oil producer in the world. Workers harvest olives from November to January using these vibrating machines that shake the fruit loose. They dump the olives into big trailers waiting to head to factories. This one can process thousands of olives an hour. First, washing off any dirt. Extra virgin olive oil is the least processed kind out there, using no heat or chemicals. The machines grind the olives into a thick paste, and then spin it. Massive decanters press it out of the mush. The factory pumps the oil into storage and finally into bottles. This is one of the most expensive cooking oils in the world, selling for over $10 a 17-ounce bottle. And it's easy to imitate, so criminal rings making fake oil have thrived since ancient Rome. Some fill up these bottles with cheap soybean or vegetable oil. Others mix in lower-grade olive oil but still label it as extra virgin.
If you hold a bottle of olive oil up to the light in the supermarket, you can't tell if it has corn oil in it or not.
Some are so organized, they have their own supply chains, from farms to bottling facilities, like this ring in Italy that Europol busted. So how do you know what you're buying is real extra virgin?
If it just says virgin, if it just says olive oil, if it says olive oil blend, if it says light olive oil, is not an olive oil that I would buy. You don't want to buy anything that's not extra virgin. They don't leave those words off on purpose, right?
Plus, if it's $3 a bottle, Larry says it's too good to be true. The pressed on date is also important. European oils are harvested in the fall and winter, so if you're buying a Spanish olive oil in August, it's nearly a year old. Larry says it starts losing flavor after a year or two. So you never want a pressed-on date that's more than 2 years old. You could also smell it. Real olive oil has a fruity and grassy smell. If it smells like nothing, or it's rancid, there's a good chance it's not real. This is real Wagyu beef, but what's popping up on menus across the US probably isn't. Wagyu literally means Japanese cow, and it refers to 4 main breeds. The Japanese government tightly regulates how these cows are raised to control the quality of their meat. A popular type of Wagyu is Kobe beef, which comes from the area around Kobe, Japan. The steers, or castrated bulls, are fed a strict diet of rice and corn. Foodies love their meat for its tenderness, sweetness, and distinct marbling. As of 2019, a pound of Wagyu could cost up to $200. The cows themselves could sell for as much as $30,000. That can be more than 10 times the price of Black Angus cattle. And Japan only exports a few thousand tons a year, so Wagyu in American restaurants isn't always up to Japanese standards. Most of the Wagyu cattle in the US have also been bred with other, hardier breeds that can handle environments like the dry heat of Texas, so their meat isn't 100% Wagyu. According to USDA rules, Wagyu cows only need to have one parent with at least 93.7% Wagyu genetics, so they could have as little as 46.9% themselves and still be called Wagyu. The USDA isn't responsible for what goes on at restaurants, so they can more easily get away with listing something as Wagyu on a menu when it might not be up to snuff.
Arby's made a new burger, upgraded it with rich, juicy Wagyu beef.
Take this commercial for Arby's Wagyu burger. In the fine print, you'll see it contains only 51% American Wagyu. So how can you make sure your $300 is getting you an actual Wagyu steak? Well, first, you can look at it. The fat in real Wagyu is evenly distributed. The marbling is distinctive with thin, intricate white veins. Also, Larry says Kobe would rarely, if ever, be served on the bone, and it doesn't make the best burger because it's too tender to be formed into patties. If you're still not convinced, you can ask to see the Wagyu's certificate of authenticity, or look for this bronze statue in restaurants authorized to sell Kobe. You might be surprised to learn even your coffee could be phony. You could just be brewing up a bag of inferior beans marketed as some more expensive ones. Or it could be something completely different, ground acorns, barley, or wheat.
Coffee is big, big, big business. And historically, it has been cut with anything that's brown. Burnt paper, burnt corn, sawdust.
That's because growing coffee is expensive and labor-intensive. Farmers need to harvest more than 1,500 of these cherries to make just 1 pound of coffee beans. And they have to do it fast.
We have to do something with it immediately. It only lasts 24 hours.
Workers have to handpick the berries, avoiding unripe ones. Then they load only the ripe ones into 100-pound bags. The skin is removed and the 2 seeds inside are dried out and roasted. Large-scale farms can produce cheaper coffee picking the whole tree and processing ripe and unripe berries together. It's not illegal, but it hurts quality. What is illegal? When counterfeiters bag up cheaper beans, slap on a fake label, and fool customers into paying more. Or when they fill a portion of a bag with cheaper coffee. And they get away with it because coffee's origin is so hard to track.
You have thousands and thousands of really small producers around the world who pick their beans and then they're put into trucks and then they're put into containers and then they're put on boats. There's so many points along those supply chains that somebody has the opportunity to tamper with products.
But you can do your due diligence. Buy from reputable sources. Verify the origin of your coffee. Look for certifications like from the Specialty Coffee Association on the packaging. Saffron is the world's most expensive spice, but the market for red gold is widely tainted with cheaper products. Real saffron comes from 3 tiny strands, or stigmas, of the Crocus sativus flower. Here in Kashmir, the delicate flowers need about 2 years to grow before farmers like Ashik Rashid can harvest them, just like his family has done for nearly a century. The stigmas are so fragile, farmers must remove them by hand. The less valuable yellow tips are cut off and sifted out. Ashik and his dad spend 2.5 hours plucking enough saffron just to fill this tiny container. All in all, it takes over 150,000 flowers to make just 1 kilo of saffron, which can cost $3,000. With those prices, counterfeiters can earn big bucks if they dupe buyers. It's even been reported criminals earned millions passing off hay, horsehair, coconut filaments, or roots as saffron. To stop the influx of imitation saffron, the local government launched this trading center. Farmers can authenticate their crop and get a GI tag. But the center has barely scratched the surface. So how can consumers make sure they're purchasing real saffron? You can do a water test.
Threads of saffron are put into water or milk. It should give very slowly release a yellow color and not an instant coloring of red or orange color. And that is a purity test for saffron.
The threads of fake saffron will also easily disintegrate, while real ones will hold their form. And then there's the price.
Paying more for products does not assure their validity, but paying less kind of assures their invalidity. You're not going to get cheap saffron.
So why is all this counterfeit stuff really that awful?
One is just pure economic fraud. If you buy what you think is Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee for $30 a pound and it's cheaper coffee, you've been ripped off.
But then there's our health. If your extra virgin olive oil is secretly cut with peanut oil and you're allergic to peanuts, well, that could be deadly.
Especially products out of China. Honey has been found to contain drugs that are banned in this country because they're known carcinogens.
Authentic brands can't compete with the cheap prices of fakes.
Cheap honey imports really do hamper us from selling our honey at a fair price. It's meeting implausible low price points.
Beekeepers warn the fraudulent stuff could put them and millions of hives out of business. But why is this problem so widespread? And why is it hard to catch the criminals? Some criminal groups are so well structured, they operate like companies with multiple departments. They even have teams researching consumer trends to decide what to counterfeit next. In one Italian olive oil ring, the culprits hired food scientists to create recipes. The counterfeiters will then secure suppliers and set up sophisticated factories and abandoned warehouses. They operate in areas where real products are made, so their movements don't arouse suspicion. Criminals will bottle up the fraudulent product to look like real ones, down to a fake batch number. To sell their counterfeits, they often knock on restaurant doors or set up fake websites or postings. Operating virtually and shipping products through multiple countries makes it much harder to trace. Europol helped break up 40 organized crime rings committing food fraud in 2022, including an Italian gang exporting fake olive oil, a network passing off gardenia as saffron in Spain, and a fake spice operation in South Africa. But with massive international supply chains, it's really hard to catch all the counterfeits. While the USDA inspects imported meat and eggs, the Food and Drug Administration is responsible for the rest, and it's estimated the FDA inspects just 1 to 2% of imported foods.
And they have made very clear that they consider the drug side of their equation a higher priority, and they always had and probably always will have finite resources. I disagree with that logic because I look at the food we eat as the only drug that everybody takes every day.
But even if they're caught, the punishment isn't usually as harsh as drug trafficking.
This is big crime. And why not? It's huge money. It's better than dealing drugs for them because no one's going to break your door down at 4 a.m. and arrest you for selling rubbish honey.
Larry says 2 things could deter counterfeiting before it starts: tougher sentencing and the use of blockchain to track the supply chain through labels.
So I think the situation is improving, just not enough. I think we need clearer laws, real penalties, and real enforcement, not just a slap on the wrist. You can't legislate crime away, but you can certainly, make it tougher.
But some of it comes down to the consumer.
Because I think if we stop buying the really cheap, horrible product, actually, in the end, this fraud will become far less of an issue.
Buy things in their whole form. You know what a lobster looks like, but you buy like lobster ravioli, sometimes there's no lobster in it.
And always look at the ingredient list. Because if you know how to differentiate the real stuff from the fake stuff, the decision of what you put in your body becomes yours.
The consumer does have power. Though we appear to be utterly disempowered in this debate, we're not.
People should not live their lives in fear of going to the supermarket. Make it your mission as a consumer to try to buy the things that are better.
If you by mistake buy some really rubbish honey, it is the best hair pack in the world, hair and face pack. Just put it on your hair, slap it on your face, and because it's only about the sugars, and it's just absolutely fantastic. So it doesn't have to go to waste. Gonna treat stuff, but you can just make it like the best beauty treatment that ever was.